The Museum Roadshow is brought to you by 125 Apparel.
Last week on the Museum Roadshow, we learned how Dixie Johnson and her late husband Don started cable television in the Lakes area. Today, that history lesson continues. How did you talk people into this new idea of having cable TV?
Well, we had a lot of work to do before we got that far because we had to strand map the whole town.
Okay, yeah.
And which was measuring the distance between each pole in the city and counting the number of subscribers that we could feed from that pole. That all had to be mapped out before the company that was going to come and put the cable in would
So
come.
there are 1,100 poles in Detroit Lakes at that time.
At that time.
Population 6,000 people. And so you yourself went from pole to pole. And how did that work?
Measured with a little wheel. It all went on a map.
Oh my God.
And that's what they needed in order to know what kind of equipment they had to put in.
And your parents came to from the farm to...
They walked with me one day because they wanted to see how it was done.
Yeah. And how about Garrett? Did he come after school?
Oh, he always was around to help, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So from pole to pole, and then the family had bought 6 of the poles, but all the other poles had to be rented?
Yep. $1 a year for each pole.
And so then the line, would the line go on the poles?
Yes.
To the homes?
But that was a company that came in and did all of that, see.
Okay.
And that's why we had to have the strand mapping done in order for them to know what kind of equipment we needed.
So in 1971, the city council gave you the okay, or you had the idea, they gave you the okay, and then within less than a year, the first person was able to turn on their TV set. All because you dug those trenches. I just love that part of the story, Dixie. Oh my goodness. And then the negotiations that you had to do in order to expand cable, because you didn't want to just be in Detroit Lakes. You needed more customers to make this cash flow.
Well, the thing that slowed Detroit Lakes down was they wanted the Minneapolis Station. And of course that's what we were after. But we were so small. And Moorhead and Fargo didn't have cable yet. So we actually, they wouldn't even listen to us to get up here, bring the
Minneapolis
Station. Well, we were too small, let's face it.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know, a couple of years later, Moorhead built their cable system, and they needed to use in order to microwave, is that correct?
Yeah, microwave.
Up to Fargo Moorhead. Our 2 towers were sitting, we had Perham built by that time, and DL, they needed our towers to get there. So we got the Minneapolis stations because Moorhead and Fargo wanted it.
And in the meantime, I was on television in Fargo, so thanks a lot, Dixie, for bringing Minneapolis in. I had to compete against them. But you added Perham in 1973, then the Minneapolis station came in 74. Then satellite receiving made a huge difference when you got satellites equipment installed so that you could get Ted Turner.
But building Perham
Yeah.
was a lifesaver for us because almost everyone in Perham bought cable television because they had poor reception over there.
Whereas in Detroit Lakes, you could have an antenna on top of your house. Yeah, that's what we did at our lake cottage. And so Perham was a lifesaver. Well, boy, that's pretty good for a Detroit Lakes woman saying that about Perham, because you can get kind of competitive with Perham around here.
What's right is right.
Yeah, what's right is right.
And that was right. Perham really helped us because we got a lot of customers over there right away.
And then I think it's so interesting how John Meyer from the newspaper, owned the newspaper at the time in Detroit Lakes, how he played a part. What did he do?
This was before we started with with Purim, but he bought the equipment to put on a local channel on 2 for the high school, which he bought all the equipment for the high school so that the kids could run the machines and everything out there and learn all of that. And they'd broadcast choir concerts and plays and football games and basketball and all the
So
stuff
that
for the
made
school.
your cable TV more valuable
Sure.
to people.
Sure, because
the
people wanted to
community
watch
cried.
the kids. Sure,
They wanted to watch their children and their grandchildren on television.
that's right.
Wow. It's interesting how different pieces of the puzzle came together. In the meantime, your husband, Don, was busy consulting other places
Correct.
to help keep the money coming in. And then he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis,
Yep, in 75.
1975.
Actually, no. 77 was when he was officially diagnosed. In 75, I knew we were in trouble.
Yeah, you could see the signs
Yes.
coming. And then by 79, he was
Totally disabled.
He was disabled.
Yep.
Wow. So you had a husband at home who was disabled from MS. You had your kids helping you, especially Garrett. You had a son-in-law, David Pratt,
Yes.
coming into the picture.
Yes.
What part did he play?
It was before, this went back before Purim was built. He came and lived with us one summer and helped, I don't even remember all the things that they did that summer, but they worked at.
He played a part.
Oh,
It
yes.
was a family business.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Positively.
And then I think it's so interesting how there were a limited amount of channels on the television. There were 13.
13, right.
And so then now by this time, you're bringing in more possibilities for people to watch. They weren't just stuck watching me on Channel 4 in Fargo.
No.
Dixie. They could also watch Ted Turner's news station in
Correct.
Atlanta and that Minneapolis station that you were bragging about earlier. Dixie. No wonder I quit TV in 96. Okay, so anyway, back to those 13 channels. So then your company had to have these setup boxes so people could watch more than 13 channels.
Converter box, yes.
Converter box. So, I mean, frankly, as a businesswoman, and you learned bookkeeping, I should have put that in the part of this story too.
Yeah,
that was, you learned that on the fly.
well, when we were in Sterling, Rock Falls.
Yeah. And how did you make that cash flow? Because everybody had to have a converter box.
Yep. Not only a converter box, but the first ones were manual, and the second ones came out before we even had all the manual ones out.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
because technology changes so
Yes,
fast. So
correct.
here you are distributing these push button. You had to get up out of your chair, if people can
Yep,
imagine.
Yep.
You had to get up out of your chair, go to
And do
your
this.
TV, punch a button to watch a different channel. And then in the meantime, the remote control came out. So you could stay in that easy chair. But back to my question, I mean, how did you make that all cash flow? Because that's a huge amount of technology that's coming into play. Who's got to pay for that? Both you and the customer?
Customer.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so that makes a huge difference. And and then Frazee, I should have mentioned, Frazee you added in 1978. Now, how did you pull that off? Because you discovered that towers were way too expensive to be building
The small ones.
these
Towns.
towers in
Yeah.
all of these towns that you eventually went to.
Yep.
So then you looked and you saw a water tower already existed. So what'd you do, Dixie?
Microwaved it to the towers and wired from there.
And you rented the water tower then?
I assume so. I don't remember that.
Yeah. Well, the bio that you gave me said that you made a deal.
I'm sure we did.
Yeah.
They wanted it, so I think they probably did real well,
Yeah.
So.
And it helped Frazee. They
Yes.
made a
Oh,
little
yeah.
money, and then they got cable television into Frazee. And then in 79, Audubon and Lake Park were added. So in the meantime, they were adjusting their rabbit ears or trying to make their antennas on top of their house work.
And almost every house in town would take cable TV, because they just didn't get decent signals.
Yeah.
And
By
all-
that
and
time, you had proven
all this-
yourself.
Yeah.
You were a long ways from the beginning when people said, it's
You
not
can't.
going to work.
That's right.
Because in 1971, they said, Don, Dixie, it's not going to work.
Don wasn't in town, but they'd tell me.
Yeah, they tell you, and you'd call up Don and say they didn't. You're going to lose your shirt. Oh, boy.
It just didn't matter to him.
Yeah, it didn't matter
he
to
knew
him
he was going to do it.
because he had a vision.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And he believed in his vision. And then later, Battle Lake, Henning, Barnesville were added to the system.
Yep.
So you had 8 systems. And then 1986, 15 years after you were digging those trenches and starting this whole process, 15 years later, 1986, you decided to sell to Arvig.
That's right.
Yeah. And then did you put your feet up and then use the digital remote?
No,
No.
I was involved in other city things by that time.
Yeah, by that time you were in city government and you were serving the city council for, what did you tell me, 23 years? Or?
Yep.
Yeah, 23 years, and at one point you were the vice mayor of Detroit Lakes, and you're watching Detroit Lakes mushroom and grow, and because it was 6,000 people when you and your family first came here.
Correct.
And now at least the sign says about 8,500, but it's probably even more than that.
It's over 9,000 now.
Over 9,000, and a lot of people live outside the city limits, like
yes.
myself, but love Detroit Lakes now. So you've seen a lot of changes. And were you the first woman on the city council?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. And you've mentored many other people and encouraged them to be in leadership positions too. I know that from friends of mine who have given you credit for that.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, Dixie, thank you so much for inviting Raina and I from TV3 into your home, and it's just been so much fun learning about, you know, the museum has a new emphasis now. It's not just history, it's also science.
Okay.
So we can check both boxes now because we've learned how we've gone from those rabbit ears to cable television to even having it on my phone.
Yeah.
Yeah, times have changed.
Really? Yes, they have.
Thank you so much, Dixie.
You are welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for watching this episode of the Museum Roadshow, brought to you by 125 Apparel.